Thanks so much, Meg, and I'm thrilled to be able to be with everyone tonight virtually. It's not the same without having a beverage in your hand and talking about all the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. The things I'm going to be sharing with you today is, as a business analyst, we spend so much time working through the challenges of understanding, A, what our organisation wants, secondly, what our stakeholders want, and last but not least, how we translate all of that into the business outcomes that everyone is looking to achieve. So what I'm going to share with you today is a couple of the things that I find are what make awesome business analysts. And that is the ability to be able to interact on a professional basis and what I call a personal and professional basis with people on a day-to-day basis. So what I want to start with is I want you to imagine you're in a helicopter. I want you to jump in your helicopter and get to the 30,000 foot view. This is where we see in most organisations. We start with a ability to look at what is the current vision of the organisation. So in other words, what are they really aiming for? And it's rather aspirational. Next down in our organisational view, we start moving into what we call the mission. This is where we start talking about defining the statements on the things we will do to make sure that we actually achieve the purpose and understand how the different work areas fit together and how we talk amongst ourselves and actually start executing on these wonderful things called projects. So ultimately what we are collectively doing, regardless of where we sit in the organisational structure, is always ensuring that we're delivering back to achieving the vision. President once said, we want to have man on the moon in 10 years. There's the vision. Then it was broken down into missions and then trying to make sure that they ultimately achieved it. So that's in business analysis, this is what we start referring to as strategy analysis. What is the organisation trying to achieve? Why are they doing it? And how are they actually going to start measuring how they get there? So to actually enable this vision and mission, we actually need to start taking some of the skills that we have as business analysts and other project professionals, work with our tasks, get people to actually perform them to ultimately achieve the actions and outcomes that we're all looking for. What I'm super thrilled about is that most people actually get down to that detail relatively quickly. What I am concerned about, though, is that most people actually miss why they're doing it in the first place. For those of you who may have heard of Simon Sinek, if not, look up a thing called starting with why. If you understand the rationale of what drives people to achieve things, it's when they actually understand the context and why you're trying to achieve things. Just like if I said, jump out the window, you all think I'd be crazy at the moment. Whereas if I told you you're jumping out the window to save your life due to the raging fire around you, that context provides you with the motivation to actually take you to the next step. And that's ultimately what we try to achieve with that organisation view, truly understand why we're doing it. Because when we talk to stakeholders, have a guess what one question they're asking in the back of their brain every time you're talking to them. Why are you talking to me? Why is this project important? And why is it important to the organisation? So as we start dealing with our stakeholders, I want to touch on some very basic communication skills. Most of you would have seen something like this. And that is where we have ultimately the sender of the communication and the receiver. So what I have in this diagram here is what I call the left brain and the right brain. For those of you who understand a little bit, your left part of your brain is what I call your recall memory. This is where you have had distinct information in your brain, where you come up with a concept and then you try and work with the right side of your brain, the creative side of your brain, to ensure that you take that concept and encode it in such a way that someone can receive it. Ultimately, the receiver gets it into their creative part of their brain, and then they've got to try and then rationalise it and wash it against all the facts and things that are in their brain from their recall memory. So as you can start seeing here, what we actually have is three very distinctive breakdown points. The first one happens inside your brain, with trying to work out firstly what you're thinking you're going to say, and then ultimately getting your mouth to say it. Then we've got to get to the concept of the breakdown between the sender and the receiver, and as we know, we'll talk a little bit about language, tone, speed, even the words that we use. People then need to decipher and decode what you're trying to say, to then get back to a conceptual level to understand how that fits in. Now, this is what we call the communication process and the breakdown structures. So what I really want you to be focusing on initially is that when you're going to speak to your stakeholders, understand that you're going to have to get through these 3 breakdown points to really get that true concept of understanding what they need. So what I want to do here is flesh that out a little bit. On the left-hand side, we have the person who's presenting the information, and of course the person on the right-hand side. When we start talking about our own attitudes, our beliefs, our opinions of how things should work. We then take a frame of reference of our experience and our knowledge to sort of back it up should we ever need to justify why we're saying things. And then we basically bring our perspective to the table and share that with our listener. We do that through verbal, being used of words. We also use non-verbs, verbs being verbals, which is your body language and maybe graphics. And good things we use as analysts is obviously our models and our tools to articulate and share information with people as well from a visual as well as an auditory and kinesthetic process. So remembering then, the listener needs to filter through their attitudes, beliefs and opinions. They've got to work out how it fits in their term of reference and experience, and ultimately to achieve their perspective before they're prepared to listen. Now this is where sometimes you can sit there and you can say, I have said this 7 times, they're just not listening to me. And I've experienced that a number of times with, when we're talking with key stakeholders, sometimes executives, sorry to many executives on the call, but at the same time, they have a different perspective. They're looking at the lens a slightly different way to what you are in trying to achieve the tactical outcomes, where they're probably looking at it more from the strategic outcomes. So what are some of the tips for better listening? The first thing is that we need to maintain eye contact. In the Western world, we have a saying that says, look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Okay, so this is why eye contact is so important. And I guess even in a virtual world at the moment, you'll notice that what I've tried to do with my video is try to make the camera at eye level. Some of you obviously are worried about having your triple chins with your camera being too low, and sometimes if your camera's too high, you're looking down on people. And once again, that is a perceived perception that you may be looking down upon them. So one of the things we do, whether it be in a physical environment or a virtual environment, is maintain that eye contact. The other thing there, which is always a trick of the trade, smile. It's amazing when you maintain eye contact and create a smile, how it basically puts the other person at ease. I know sometimes I remember an old boss of mine who used to stick his fingers on the side of his face every morning and make a smile. And he said, if you then set a smile on the face, it sets the tone for the day. So one of the things I'd encourage you to do with any stakeholder engagement you have, people want to be around people that they like. So once again, get a good smile on your face to keep that going. The next thing is making sure that you really are focusing on the listening. And what I mean by that is we don't just listen with our ears, we also listen with our eyes. Like if I'm turning around and saying, yep, I really agree with that, and I'm shaking my head left or right, I'm not necessarily being congruent. So in other words, what I'm saying is not actually happening with the way things are happening. So what I'm really interested here with your listening is really giving those non-verbal feedbacks, the nods of the heads and the, oh, yeah, okay, and some hand gestures to let people continue with them and give them the freedom and the space to actually listen. So one of the things I always do is I mentally restate what's happening. That's called paraphrasing, and when we start really ensuring we gather the requirements correctly, we always want to put it back into what the people are saying. And when we start using their words, they're hearing the words that they've already shared with you. So all of a sudden they're building that trust with you because you are gathering the information that they're providing and making sure you're playing it back to them. Obviously, we need to ask lots of different questions, open questions, closed questions, factual questions, emotional questions. But ultimately, we're doing that to basically seek information so that we can continue on the discussion. So that's the way you've got to be making sure that you're looking after your non-verbal behaviours and some of the signals I mentioned before. One of the things that I have used extensively, I use it on my young kids when they were little, and I still do it with the older kids, commonly referred to as executives. If I want to get them to talk more, I'll ask them, so tell me what you're asking for. And I'll say, oh, I'm looking for an increase in blah, blah, blah. And then all I put to the word is yes and. How was your day? Good. Yes, and? Oh, I had maths and English. Oh, okay. What were the 2 things you actually learnt in English? One of the things you'll realise with stakeholders is once you get them starting to talk, it's very hard to get them to stop to talk. So what I'm really trying to do is get them to encourage you, get them to speak. And this is why not allowing them to give you one-word answers and things like that. Oh, that's great. Could you put that in a different way for me so that I could understand it or share it with somebody else? It's a great way to enable that to happen. So look, obviously we talk about the verbal and the non-verbal communications. So when I talk about context, this is where when you're going to speak to your stakeholders, the first piece of context I'm getting there is explaining why you're there. What's the purpose? What are you really trying to achieve in that engagement? Are you there to build a relationship, to kickstart something? Are you there to refine information? Are you there to elicit information? Are you there to go and seek clarification or sign-off? Once people know why you're doing it and answering this question, so what? What's next? Let me repeat that. So what? What's next? The reason behind it, people love to know what is the next step in the process. And I can understand how they're contributing. As an example, if I turn around and I say, oh, look, Gary, I need your input so that I can take that information, collate it with the 3 other stakeholders, and present it back to senior management for them to sign off on the requirements. People now see where they fit in the picture, and that's where context is so important. The next thing is pace. I'm sure you've all had people who have talked at this pace and you sort of say, hurry up. But then you've also got someone a bit like me who talks at 1 million miles an hour and doesn't know when to stop and keeps talking. And you're saying, can you just slow down? I haven't caught up. So this is where we do need to vary our pace. We do need to be able to create pauses. We also need to be able to create space so that other people can respond. The hardest part is when you actually ask a question and the other person doesn't answer it. What I find with a lot of BAs is we go, oh, they haven't answered the question. I'll ask the question a different way. No, there are just some stakeholders that just need time to stop, think, reflect, go through their filters, check their attitudes, check their perceptions before they're prepared to actually provide any response. So once again, find the space. And that's where by using your pace and space, gives people the ability to actually give you the answers rather than trying to rush them into another one. I'm sure each and every one of you have worked with a very shy introvert, and it's very hard to get them talking. So once again, give them the space and the freedom to be able to share. Obviously, we've got your pitch, you've got your deep executive voice, and you've got your high excited voice. Work on that tone and actually really try to do. If you want to get people excited, start using a really excited voice. Get that speed going. But if you need someone to really consider things that you're trying to share, slow that pitch down and that tone down so that you can make it significant. So as you can start seeing here, these are all things that are completely in your control when you're dealing with stakeholders. Obviously, we do lots of different body languages, but raising the eyebrows, sort of putting your hands to your face, thinking. Things like that, trying to get those expressions and leaning forward into a discussion can be all those type of things that are needed to let people know that you are actively involved and invested in the conversation that you have with them. So once again, none of this is rocket science. It's a lot of what you've already been doing subconsciously. All I'm trying to do is make you very conscious next time you go and do your stakeholder management. So Kurt Hanks, back in 1991, was one of my old managers. He said, every person in the universe is totally unique, and every combination creates a whole new formula. So as we know, if we start putting lots of different people together from different background areas, they're all going to come with different elements, and you're trying to say, well, how do I adjust to be able to deal with this person and that person, and I've got to change my tone and give this person space, and Mary's going to jump in over the top of Mike because he didn't respond. The good part is, people are not totally unpredictable. And I guess really what I have found throughout my career is that I have spent a lot of time using my eyes to listen as much as using my ears. And ultimately it's what I call observable behaviours. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is what I use, and it's for you to go and spend some more time doing some research and looking it up. It's a thing called the social style model. I can talk about Myers-Briggs, I can talk about SDI, I can talk about all these psychometric type measurements that give us the ability to understand more about who we are. Myers-Briggs, one of 16 different personality types. How do you deal with an ENTJ when you're an IFSJ? The comment here is we've got to remember, firstly, what are the 4 acronyms? What am I? How do I respond? How do I do that? How do we do it? So what I want to share with you is a thing called social styles, which is based around observable behaviours by people. Now, I have been actively involved in training thousands of people across my career in workshops and running workshops and facilitating events. And to be honest, I use this technique on most participants in the room within the first 15 minutes to get a snapshot of the type of people I'm dealing with and how I then use those observable behaviours to then adjust my style to be able to fit and behave, interact, influence and communicate with the different audiences. A lot of the times you will walk into someone without knowing anything about them. Now, the joys today of social media means that you can sort of type in someone's name and get something up. LinkedIn as a professional network can do it. I'm sure before you speak to someone, look at their profile picture. It'll tell you a little bit about them. Are they relaxed? Are they structured? Are they smiling? Do they look serious? Are they very tailored? Are they more relaxed things? Facial hair. Is it trimmed? Is it behaviour? All these type of things. We already come up with our preconceived ideas of people. So while it's great to make an initial assessment, the best thing to do is really wait and see how they present themselves in behaviours. And I'll be honest, I have had numerous occasions where I have had a preconceived idea of someone that was completely shattered within 2 or 3 minutes of my conversations with them. And I had to then adjust my behaviour to make sure that we were able to create the space to be able to elicit the information we needed. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about 2 different dimensions. The first one is what we call assertiveness. So this is where, if you think from a horizontal viewpoint, on the left-hand side, we have a lot of people who ask lots of questions. Okay, they tend to be doing a lot of asking, and we find a lot of business analysts on that side of the quadrant. Whereas on the other side, we have people who do a lot more telling and are very directional. So once again, 2 extremes, and I think quite seriously, even just using that as a first up assessment, you can even work out if they're the type of person you're dealing with. They're telling you exactly what they want. I want to make sure that the column is 12 inches wide. I want to make sure that it's got a heading on top. I want to make sure this happens, and I need this, and I want that, and I need this. Whereas from the asking side, it could be, well, why do we really need that column? What are we trying to put in that column? What font are we using? Do we have to use it in Excel? Couldn't we use something else? So you can start seeing you're going to have to adjust your style based on the type of thing that they're coming with. The next dimension is what we call responsiveness. This is ultimately the degree to which people tend to control their emotions, or the fact that they are absolutely sharing every emotion. I'm sure some of you have been around where a senior executive has said, look, thank you very much for turning up to the town hall today. I'd just like to give you a little bit of knowledge that as of this afternoon, you'll all be made redundant. Now, of course, we hope that doesn't happen unless you work for Bayer Media, which happened this week. But more importantly is that the person's up there not showing a lot of emotion. They're becoming very transactional, and they're really controlling the way in which they interact with you. Whereas, of course, the other end, oh my God, the world's falling down, I've just lost my job, what am I going to do? And we're becoming very much what we call emotive. So what I'm going to do over the next 5 minutes is I'm going to get you to do a self-assessment of yourself based on this assertiveness and responsiveness. But I'm actually going to give you a number of observable behaviours to work out which one of the social styles is your dominant, and then how you can adjust. And what we'll do for the rest of the presentation is understand who you are, but then more importantly, the type of stakeholders you have and how you can prepare to actually work with them as we engage in the project. So first up, I'll give you the instruction, like a good business analyst. So we need to select the left side or the right side of the characteristics over the next 2 slides. I've got 1 slide for assertiveness and 1 for responsiveness. So for those of you who don't have pen and paper, I'd like you to use your hands. Okay? So if you select, if you tend to be more on the left, put one digit up on your left hand. If it's 1 character for the right, on the right hand. The good news is there's an odd number, so you should be able to get a dominant left or right. Now, as we go into this style, remembering these are about observable behaviours. So I want you to put yourself in the mindset as if you're at work. Okay, whether that be on a virtual environment or a physical environment, and really switch that brain on as if and do that assessment based on that. So, let's go. So, down the middle are the different characteristics. So the first one is a handshake. Do you tend to have a softer handshake, or do you tend to have a firmer handshake? If it's softer, there's 1 point on the left. If it's firm, on the right. The next one is verbosity. In other words, the number of words you use. Do you use lots of words, or do you keep it relatively low and simple? So low on the left-hand side, high on the right-hand side. The next one, eye contact. Steady and consistent, or is it more intermittent and dismissing and not necessarily wanting to engage with people in eye-to-eye contact? Left or right? I'm sure some of you at the moment go, but I'm in the middle. Okay, for the sake of this assessment, what do you tend to do most? Okay, just like with any of these assessments. And just remember, things do change depending on the environment you're in. The next one is statements. Are you empathetic? In other words, are you showing your emotions, or are you sort of holding back? Gestures, and what we mean by that is hand gestures and body gestures. Are we doing lots of them, or are we being very still? Voice level, exceptionally high, let's get excited. Oh yes, I'm a little bit quieter. Now once again, there is no right or wrong with any of these. These are just things that you're self-assessing. The next one obviously is your voice speed. Is it fast or slow? Is your communication eager or is it hesitant? And then ultimately, are your movements fast and slow? So now that you've gone through those 9, one of them would be left side would either be left side or right side to be more dominant. Now, if anyone hasn't got one grader, you haven't done your math right, go back and have a look at the characteristics. There are 9 characteristics there. So I want you to remember that. Now, if you are more on the left-hand side, I want you to put your left foot forward so you remember. If you are more on the right-hand side, I want you to put your right foot forward. So now you've got your hands free again to start with when we start talking about responsiveness. Okay, let's now talk a little bit about the responsiveness. First up, facial expressions. Are they limited or very animated and constantly throwing great smiles and eyes and flickerings and those type of things? Once again, trying to give you the extremes, or otherwise being very what we call deadpan serious, where you're not providing any emotions. This one, next one is about hand and body movements. Do you do lots of them, or are they limited? The next one, time perspective. Oh, it doesn't matter if I'm 15 minutes late, that's flexible. Or no, I'm definitely on time, and anyone who's more than 30 seconds late is just rude. Once again, that's probably more the discipline side. Next one, conversations. Are you more anecdotal and, oh yeah, you know, it'll be right? Or you're very factual? No, it's definitely 72.6%, and it's always the third Tuesday of the month. Next one is whether or not you've got a high emphasis on details or low emphasis on details. Next one, obviously personal feelings. Do you tend to share them, or do you tend to avoid sharing them? Personal contact, okay, do you avoid it or do you encourage it? And last but not least is non-verbal feedback. Is it slow or fast? So as we go through this, you'll notice that this is actually an even number. Anyone who gets an even number, well, that means you're a little bit more flexible than most people. But once again, if you're on the left, I want you to put your left hand on your left knee. If you're on the right-hand side, I want you to put your right hand on your right knee. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take those 2 elements and bring them together to work out which one of the 4 social styles that you fit into. Ready for some answers? No, not going to tell you straight away. The reason is that I want to emphasize that what I'm sharing with you has a level of ethics based around it. Is that we need to be able to use this type of style constructively. It's designed for you to be able to ascertain the type of environment you're going into, the type of person you're dealing with, but more importantly, we're trying to do it to understand and improve our relationships. This will enable you to be able to have greater engagement with your stakeholders, because you'll be able to identify the situation they're in and respond appropriately. And that's ultimately what the rest of the presentation is going to be about, is how you can then work together with the different styles based on your own. There is no right or wrong style. I repeat, there is no right or wrong style, and any good team should have a collection of all these 4 styles so that we can have that concept together. The other thing I do want to emphasize is this model is what I call very Eurocentric. So very much around the concept that this is more around the Western world. While there are very much some similarities in the Eastern world, there may be some differences. To give you an example, I was working once with a large freight company doing a business analysis foundations course over 5 days. I had this gentleman who was exceptionally smart. He was a Samoan in the front of the room. And George always refused to look me in the eye. Over the 5 days, he was constantly disengaging eye contact. And to be honest, I thought he was really disinterested in the course. So on the second day, I went to George and I said, look, how are you enjoying the course? Oh, loving it. This is awesome. I'm learning so much. And I said, would you mind if I provided you some feedback? And he said, yeah. I said, I just find that you sort of seem to be disengaged from the course material. He goes, oh, no, sir. So George called me and said, oh, no, I have to call you sir. In my culture, Samoan culture, if you're a day older than I am, I can't look you in the eye as a level of respect. So once again, there are some cultural norms that we need to be mindful of, which is why I wanted to give you a bit of this ethics class before we actually went into actually giving the results. And look, once again, very Euro-Western-centric, but more importantly, can be adapted when you do move into other cultures. For those of you who do deal with other cultures, there is an amazing cultural awareness training on the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's website. It talks all about the cultural norms. It's a great thing that if you're ever dealing with different cultures, people from different backgrounds, it's great to just be aware of things. As an example, you never ask a Pakistani out for a drink on a Friday night. Okay? That's the night they don't do it. Ask them any other night, they're going to have lots of fun with you. But once again, just being aware of those type of elements, bring it all together. So let's talk about the actual 4 different styles. So as you can see here, we've got the different perspectives. We've got the responsiveness, and we've got the assertiveness being the horizontal and vertical lines. In the top right-hand corner, if your hand was on your right, if your right foot was forward and your right knee was forward, you're in the driving quadrant. To be very task-oriented and rather fast-paced, and you like achieving the outcomes. You want to achieve the outcomes that's needed. For those of you who've got their left foot forward, but they're on their right hand, their right hand's on their right knee, you're expressive. Okay, these are people who are very much worried about keeping the excitement and thrill there, but very awesome about keeping a team together. This is what I would call great leaders and great supervisors and managers who love to lead others. For those of you who were left hand and left leg, that's bottom left, that's amiable. This is where you're very people-oriented. You like to take a very structured approach. You like your procedures. You like to be very disciplined on time to achieve those outcomes. And last but not least, if you had your right hand on your left leg, you're analytical. So this is where you're basically slower paced, but wanting to ask lots of questions, wanting to achieve the task that's needed, but for heaven forbid, don't ever rush that person. Why? Because they want to be 110% right before they ever make a decision. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk through these 4 different styles. Now that you know which one you are, that's a starting point. So understanding reflectively who you are, self-awareness. Some of you may be saying that, hey, I can be a little bit of a driver, a little bit of expressive. Sometimes I can be an analytical driver. Sometimes I can be an analytical amiable. The concept here is I'm not necessarily expecting you to be perfectly fitting in one box. Because remembering, this is all about being adaptive, and it's based on observable behaviours. So once again, you will find there are a lot of people out there who are flexible, and depending on the situation and environment they're in, they can play any one of those 4 roles. As a business analyst, you get me into real analytical work, I'm definitely in that top left-hand corner. You start asking me to be driving a program forward to actually achieve the expected results and outcomes and benefits, yeah, very much in that drive. If I'm trying to make sure that I'm achieving the collective change management process and bringing people on the path, I'm very much in that expressive side. And if I really want to get down to detailed step-by-step processes of making sure I'm achieving the things in the right time frame, I'm very much in that amiable element. So let's talk a little bit about these. So I'm not going to read these verbatim word for word. This is where I'll get you to read them. But if you're a driver, very much about wanting to take action. So if you're going to go and prepare a interaction with a driver, firstly you're going to be on time, because they're time discipline. You're going to tell them the actions you're taking, you're telling them how it's going to lead to the outcomes you're going to achieve it in, one level of risk that it's going to take. Look, I think this is about an 80% chance that this will work. Great, fantastic, let's move forward. But more importantly, they base all their decisions on facts. Don't ever go into a driver telling them how emotionally upset you're feeling at the moment around the change that's happening. They'll dismiss you, they'll get you back to action, and they'll probably get you to talk about that competitive and discipline around them. Now, once again, I'm showing you the extremes with some of these so that you can see these as observable behaviours. The next thing are the expressives. This is where they use their intuition, their gut feel. They love being able to talk with people. They love being the leader. These people who get super excited about team bonding events. Let's run a toga party on a Tuesday afternoon, an indoor putt-putt on Thursday. So in other words, what they're trying to do is increase people's emotions. They're trying to make sure they have a sense of belonging and creating that real sense of moving things forward. The thing is, they make a lot of their decisions based on facts, but they're also prepared to take risks. So once again, these are people who think of jumping out of a very safe going skydiving is a super exciting stuff and can't understand why anyone wouldn't want to do it. Moving on to the analytical, okay? This is where we are thinking oriented. We're very much about logic and statistics and information and facts. We want to know how contextually things fit together because we can't move forward unless we understand why we're doing it and how this fits into the approach. These people are normally disciplined about time, but never ever rush them. I've worked with a lot of analysts where I'll say, hey, look, I need requirements by the end of it. Oh, don't rush me. I haven't spoken to 16 stakeholders and I haven't documented this. I need more time. The reason is analytical people hate to be wrong. Let me repeat, they hate to be wrong. So what do? They try and mitigate any risk of being wrong by gathering those facts, gathering that information, and basically using those facts to reinforce their own perceptions and belief of what needs to happen. Last but not least is amiable people. This is very much where they're relationship-based, they're very good, they're amazing workers, they love following a process. But if you tell them they're actually going to do an office relocation, watch them go into a conniption. The reason is that these are the people that actually have everything down to the last minute. Okay, I finish work at 5:45. It takes me 6 minutes to walk down to the bus. The bus arrives at 5:59. That gives me 22 minutes to get home, which means when I get home, I'll put the kettle on while I go and get into my gym gear. And then while I'm in my gym gear and the kettle's boiled, I'll actually make my chai tea so that I'm in the car by 6:25 so that I can then spend 15 minutes to go across town to be ready for a 6:45 spin class. Now, while you think I'm exaggerating, this is why these people are amazing when it comes to process. They understand the alternate path, the exception path, because at the end of the day, they're all talking very much around reducing anything that can go wrong. But they love taking action. But remembering a lot of the actions they take is based on their emotions. So what I'm doing here is these are the type of people that you'll come across in that you've got your drivers, which is predominantly your executives who are trying to drive the expected outcomes from your projects, the expressives, which are the team leaders who are leading groups of people to actually deliver on the activities. We have the analytical people who are constantly asking why and reducing the risk and making sure that we can get those requirements. And then ultimately our amiable people who are actually providing us with the boundaries and the constraints of the processes that organisations leverage to be able to achieve our outcomes. Now, once again, there's no right and wrong, and I have tried to talk a little bit about extremes here, because remember, some people could be a mixture of two of these, but once again, you'll see them based on those observable behaviours. So the problem is that when we talk about those observable behaviours, when you start putting people under stress, now I'm sure that each and every one of you have worked in stressful situations. Some of you may still be working through them now with the current environment that we're in. What we have here is what we call backup behaviours. If you start putting a driver in under pressure, it'll start becoming the term autocratic. I don't care what you say, just do it, get it to me by Friday, and just get it done. So in other words, they become very directive because they're worried about not achieving the outcomes. When you start putting an expressive under pressure, they'll start saying, I don't like the way you're talking to me. And as a matter of fact, I don't like that tie. It just does not go with your hair. So in other words, they come out personally attacking you because they find that by attacking your emotions that they can maintain strength. If you start putting an analytical under pressure, this is where they start avoiding being connected to the outcome. Oh, I need more time. You're not giving me enough information. I need to go and spend more time here. They're trying to avoid being associated with failure. And basically, amiable people, basically what happens is they have what's called acquiescing. And allow me to demonstrate that for you. These are the people that just go quiet. They're not going to say anything. They will have all those conversations in the coffee room afterwards with their teams, with their people, but ultimately they'll be the ones that will be pushing back on you because you have not been able to do it. So when you put those amiable people under pressure, they go quiet. And they're the hardest people ever to engage with as a business analyst when you're trying to elicit requirements and you're sort of saying, well, tell me how you're going to help me achieve the expected outcome. All they want to do is go away and hide and not be engaged. So once again, you can start seeing when you're putting people under pressure how some of these characteristics start coming out. So really, what am I really talking about when we're talking about stakeholder engagement? It's really about ensuring that we have this level of versatility. So when I'm dealing with a driver, that I'm actually going to turn up on time, give them the information, give them the facts, tell them the risks associated, so that at the end of it, I can be prepared to be able to achieve the outcome. With the expressive, I'm going to have to spend some time building a relationship with them, talking about things that are going on in their life or in their communities or even in their sections to be able to start building that rapport. And I'm potentially going to have to change some of my body language, gearing them to be a little bit more animated than most because of the way we're doing it. Also, when we're talking to analytical, we want to be very factual. We want to be correct. One thing about analytical people, hate people who are incorrect. So they will sit there and go, but you said 3 slides ago that the word wasn't versatility, it was being adaptable. Okay, so they hang on to factual information. And same thing with amiable people is that at the end of the day, they're very much about making sure that they achieve the outcomes. But if they can't achieve the outcomes, all of a sudden you'll just never see Mary again in the office. She's just gone and found another job somewhere else. So what I'm talking about, to work with others, is we need to be versatile to be able to match. We need to be able to become what we call a chameleon at times to be able to get it. Now, some people might say, hang on, that's the wrong way to do it. Well, ultimately, that's how we can influence us achieving the outcome in the shortest period of time. People love talking to people who are like them. As an example, if you're going to go into an executive office and talking really at the highest levels of your organisation, are you going to go in with your polo shirt and your chinos or your an outfit that you would normally wear on a Saturday afternoon? No, you'd probably go a little bit more polished. Why? Because there is a perception that if you're going to be sharing information at that level, that you are coming with a sense of authority and professionalism. Now, I'm not saying that just dress alone, but it could be the use of words. When we start talking to an executive, we'll start talking about outcomes. We'll start talking about strategic objectives. We'll start talking about risks. We'll start talking about constraints and dependencies. These are things that so we start using the language that they use and the style that they use as well. So let's talk a little bit more about, firstly, understanding your social style and understanding the differences and how to use those appropriate behaviours with others. So, how do we work with drivers? This is where we've got to be able to support our conclusions and our actions and how it's going to achieve the expected outcome. That's how we're going to build rapport. We need to be making sure we're turning up on time. If the time starts at 2 o'clock, be there potentially 1 minute to 2, because these people hate time wasters. You've all seen these people who you'll be in a meeting at 2:29, they start packing their stuff up and they're gone by 2:30 even though the meeting may not have been finished. They're on to the next meeting because they don't want to be late. And last but not least, the best way to deal with drivers is start talking about probabilities when asking them to make a decision. Okay, so it's a 50-50 chance this may not work. The probability of this actually being achieved is around 90%. Now, if any of you have ever heard of the term called the 80-20 principle or the Pareto rule, this is why when we say that we're over 80%, executives say, let's just go for it. Because the Pareto rule states that 20% of your effort will give you 80% of your results. To achieve the other 20% of the results, it's going to take 80% of your time. You all may know it in the world as quick wins. Okay, that's why they're constantly looking for the quick wins. What's the 20% of effort that's going to give me 80% of what I'm hoping for? They're not looking for 100%. A lot of the times they're probably overextending or compensating for the estimates just so that you can come close to achieving it. Now, remembering this slide deck is going to be available after the presentation, so for those who are furiously taking notes, do understand that you will get a copy of this presentation to review afterwards. Okay, let's now start when we talk about expressives. Firstly, we need to start talking about their intuitions, their dreams, their desires of where they're seeing what the future state is going to look like. And this is how you build rapport with them. Tell them that you're on the journey to help them get to where they need to get to. This is where we're going to have to be a little bit more stimulating, a little bit more excited, because if you're not excited with an expressive, they think you're against them. So I know sometimes it's really hard to muster up that internal energy. If any of you have been watching the Michael Jordan series on Netflix, you realise that sometimes you just need something to drive him to build up that energy to get into that next stage. Same thing, it may be feeling really draining. I'm sure most of you have come home after a long day and said, oh my God, I feel exhausted. And that's because you've gone outside your normal comfort zone to be able to be versatile and adaptive to work with your stakeholders. The other thing with them is to provide testimonials. So in other words, when we did this last time, this is the outcome we achieved. This is Haydn before ABKing Pro. This is Haydn after ABKing Pro. Okay, they love before and after shots. And as we know as business analysts, we love using current state models. We're using our swim lane diagrams, our concept diagrams, even our process maps to show where we are today and where we need to be. So they're a great way there. Like expressives are also relatively visual. It's always good to bring some things to touch and feel so that they feel that they're part of the prototypes for these people is one of the love going to for it. Next one, what do we do with analytical people? This is where we need to support their principles. Okay, start agreeing with them. Try and find the common ground of what you agree with first. If you start arguing with people, they'll all of a sudden start pushing back on you. So really what you're looking for is to be able to build that rapport quickly by sort of saying, okay, yeah, I agree with you on that. So find that common ground. And if anyone's done any negotiation training, the quickest way to actually get an outcome is to agree on the things you both agree on. So once again, talk about how we do that. Make sure that you are accurate about what you're saying, because ultimately, when you're being accurate about what you're saying, it builds your own credibility of them in their mind. So in other words, if all of a sudden in our household, don't be willy-nilly, okay? And what I mean, don't be sort of, oh yeah, it could be this, it could be that. Quite seriously, an analytical person goes, well, is it this or is it that? It's not, that could be anything. They're looking for definitive. So once again, dealing with analyticals, you're looking for the evidence for when they're making decisions. So in other words, these are the people who get those email chains that keep going down the list, and they'll read the full 72 pages before they'll buy the Buy Now button, because they want to make sure that they've got all the evidence, that they've got the proven statistics, and they've got all that information. How do we deal with the amiable people? Well, first up, once again, we've got to start supporting their feelings and relationships with how they're fitting in with their teams and how this fits in with the bigger picture of the organisation. Once again, build some time to agree with them. It will take a while to actually start getting amiable people to talk, because they've got a very, very distrusting mind in the first place. Why do you want to change? This is why we've got to provide that context and understand right at that very beginning why the organisation is picking this project right now, and why their contribution is going to help not just themselves, their department, but also the overall organisation achieve the outcomes. So once you provide that vertical view back to why you're doing something, that's where you're going to build credibility with them, because they're not just being told to do it, they can see how it fits into the bigger picture. The other thing with amiable people, this is where they love money-back guarantees, 100% accuracy. They want the assurance that when you're asking them to make a decision, that they can actually change their mind. Just like going back to that 72-page thrilling email that you get in your inbox occasionally, right at the very bottom, 100% money-back guarantee, 30-day risk-free. This is the part that we want to emphasize. We can be saying, look, we will not be moving to the new processes or the new outcomes we're trying to do until such time as we've got your ability to understand how that fits. So what I'm looking for when I'm dealing with amiable people is I'm really giving them the structure, how that structure fits into a larger context, and more importantly, that we're not going to go and just do it to them, we're going to do it with them. So we've spoken through the 4 different styles. So this is some of the things you need to be mindful of when you are in each of the 4 different styles. So let's start. If you're analytical, okay, we've got to start appreciating the efforts of others, okay? You are not the subject matter expert. You are not the guru. You do not know everything. So in other words, we need to be ensuring that we're bringing other people along with the journey. The other thing is we need to supply information even though it's not 100% correct, or it may not be complete, okay? One of the things I always encourage every business analysis practice is to actually do peer review of requirements. And what I mean by that is I do the peer review against the SMART acronym. Is the requirement specific? Is the requirement measurable? Is it achievable? Is it realistic? And is it traceable? In other words, can we trace it back to a person, a department, a system, a process, or an outcome? And all I do is I get people to actually circle the requirement and just sort of say, look, didn't quite understand it. You may need to, it failed the SMART test, you may need to rewrite that so that someone else can understand it in all its glory. So the problem that I find is most business analysts aren't prepared to do that until they're 100% correct. No. Do 5, go and get them peer reviewed. Why? I prefer you to get started on the right part of the feedback in the beginning rather than writing 130 requirements and having to go back and fix them because you didn't take a consistent approach through it. The other thing with analytical people, you may want to let your feelings show a little bit. Yeah, look, that's called frustration, could be excitement, but more importantly, to let people know that you're human. Okay, that we're not just there to do the analytical stuff and pull it all out. We are there to make sure that we are understanding that there is a change impact, whether that be a personal, a department, or an organisational change, and how that's going to affect the organisation going forward. For those of you who are drivers, and I'm probably talking to Meg right now. Okay, firstly, we need to be aware of creating tension. The reason is we like to be able to drive things to conclusion. And look, I'm picking on Meg as much as I'm picking on myself at the moment, is that we want to get to an outcome and we want to make sure we get there, and we're prepared to go over a couple of hurdles and a couple of speed bumps to be able to achieve that outcome. So once again, we just need to be aware that we could be creating tensions by moving too fast. What I find is a lot of drivers have already made the conclusion, they just haven't got everyone to catch up to where they are. They're very quick thinkers, quite creative thinkers, but more importantly is you can't expect everyone to be thinking the same way. So this is where you need to be able to value the opinions of others and make sure that you accommodate your pace to your teammates. And what I mean by that is that when you're dealing with your stakeholders is that you need to let them catch up, okay? We can't be sprinting and just expecting everyone to be following us. We need to be able to get to a stage where everybody is in agreement, and at the end, they can have voluntary cooperation. And what I mean by that is they want to do it, not because they're told to do it. So this is where we need to be careful about not being autocratic. Rather than just telling them what they need to do, get them to come on the journey by showing them why, the what, and the how. For those who are expressive, okay, we need to be careful of not being the cheerleader. oh, this is so exciting. We really need to get on with this. Come on, team. Let's get involved in this workshop and really show them that we can be the best team. Now, of course, I'm exaggerating here, but sometimes we have these expressives that are exceptionally protective of their teams and do the talking on behalf of their teams. So this is where you need to be careful that you allow others to actually contribute to the conversation. We also need to make sure that we do pay attention to facts. Remembering facts are just something that get in the way of a good story, but remembering when we're dealing with the other type of social styles that the facts are really important to your drivers and your analyticals. The other thing I have found running a lot of workshops across my career is sometimes expressives just come out with what I call spontaneous comments. Now, that's what I call a death by stake in the heart. Oh, that's just stupidly wrong. Okay, I've heard some of those things. Oh, come on, you can be smarter than that. They don't do it necessarily to be naughty. They just want to encourage people to move forward. It's just unfortunately that their brain hasn't caught up with their mouth. So this is why what I mean by spontaneous comments. The things are coming out before they think. Let's be honest, we've all been there and been in the aftermath of what we have to deal with someone who's done that in a workshop. So once again, just something to be mindful of. The trick of the trade, as I say to my kids, whenever you're angry, count to 3 before you say anything, otherwise you might regret it. And I do that same thing. It just buys me time to reflect, let me process that, let me go through my filters, let me understand why that's being said, and then trying to change it. Now, I'm not expecting you all to be saints and be perfect. All I'm saying is just be mindful. Last but not least, the amiable people. Okay. Be aware of potentially being overly sensitive. Okay. While we understand that you take great pride in your work and achieving the outcomes and following the processes and making sure you're within the compliance and guidelines, remembering that it is a team event. So this is where sometimes you may need to be very open about expressing your opinion. Now, it's not necessarily to be worried, but the whole problem is most people won't put an opinion out there because they're worried about the ridicule. I have actually found that one of a gentleman by the name of Tony, I won't mention his surname, he was in a meeting, and what I actually found with Tony is he wouldn't talk or wouldn't have an opinion. But then he'd come and talk to me after the meeting, and it would be amazingly insightful. Amazingly insightful. I go, well, Tony, why didn't you say that in the meeting? He goes, because no one gave me the opportunity to speak. So what I actually got him to do, I said, Tony, right, next time you want to say something, just open your mouth. Keep it really wide, and then I'll use that as the technique to understand, right, Tony wants to say something. So give people the space to be able to provide those opinions. So in other words, they have the ability to be able to speak up sooner. I honestly used to work at Charles Sturt University. We used to have to do a lot of commuting between campuses, and two of the biggest campuses was Bathurst and Wagga, which is a 4-hour one-way trip. I found that I got more information in the trip down there, the trip back, than what any workshop that I ever ran, because people were feeling free to be able to speak in a less formal environment. So another trick of the trade with amiable people is take them for a coffee, get them outside of their environment, get them to be comfortable so that they don't feel that they're doing it, and make it probably a smaller group rather than a larger group. So as you can start seeing here, I'm hoping you've got lots of self-reflection that's helping you understand a little bit more how when you prepare to go and work with a stakeholder, how you could do a bit of preparation to help you get there. So one of the things I want to talk about is another thing in this definition called status. Okay, status, my definition, does not mean any social standing. It doesn't mean occupational prestige or hierarchical elements. Oh, they're an SDS or they're a senior executive. They're in the C-suite. At the end of the day, for me, status is not about who you are or where you fit, but it's more about what you do. What you actually play out, or whether you try to be akin to dominance and submission. So what I mean by that is that how do you turn up? How many times have you actually seen someone walk into a meeting room and sit down and be completely disheveled, disorganized, and have no interest in being there? What level of status are they portraying? Is it a high status or a low status? Low. What if someone comes in very structured, they've already probably got an agenda up on the board, they've got their meeting notes, they've come prepared with artifacts and materials that are going to support that workshop. They're showing they're prepared and sharing a higher status. So what I'd like to do, status is something we do, not something we are. And as business owners, we spend a lot of time dealing with lots of different stakeholders. And we spend lots of times in workshops, collating information, talking with individuals. So a lot of the times we are being judged on what we do, not the fact that we've got the job title business analyst or any other job title. It's about how we're prepared, how we adjust, and how we move forward. Some of you may know those as professional skills, elicitation, facilitation, and those type of ones that ultimately we don't necessarily get certified in, but become an integral part to being a true professional who has been given great respect and achieved the outcomes we need. So when we start talking about some of the status characteristics, what I want to talk about is the expressions consist of a couple of things. Firstly, the use of space. Okay, if you want to look at high status, what sort of physical? Are you going to make yourself small, or are you going to stand up and potentially put your hands on your shoulders and peacock is the word we use. In other words, make yourself bigger. Stand up straight, hold yourself well, make sure that your clothing's correct, your shirt's tucked in, there's no lipstick on your teeth. Whatever it is, it's that concept of taking pride in your presentation. So that's more about the use of space and hand gestures and movements. The next one is the rhythm of movement. Okay, if you're sort of going all over the place like this, it's sort of like, oh, hang on, it's sort of showing that you're not in control of your space. Whereas I'm trying to provide you with a very slow hand movement and very considered and approached, it's showing you that it's that I'm in control of the situation. The other thing, so that's showing high status. Low status is when you're basically kicking back, leaning back, sort of throwing your hands behind your head, disengaging, even potentially looking at a mobile phone or another device. In other words, being distracted. So rhythm of movement between high and low status can really make a difference. The next thing is the quality of your eye contact. Okay, look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Now, guys and girls on the call, and I say guys and girls, the reason behind that, anything longer than 5 seconds looking into someone's eyes is perceived as intimate. So this is where we need to be really careful around our quality of contact. This is where we're going to have to use blinking, we're going to have to look away, we're going to have to come back in such a way. So one of the tricks that I have is I try and look at people's foreheads rather than look them in the eye. It's a simple trick to make me stop so that I can focus on their whole face rather than just looking directly into someone's eyes. Because once again, we wanted to make sure that we want quality eye contact. We want to make people level, but remember, anything longer than 5 seconds could be perceived as intimate. Next thing is the distance between your hands and your face, in other words, your head area. You know those people who sort of talk like this, and they've got their hands around their face, and they're sort of trying to stop you. The reason is that when you're covering your face, you're basically stopping people from lip reading. Okay? Most people don't understand that we do lip read. I'm sure you've all watched a sporting event where there's been someone on the ground where they're just gone, or used other expletives. We know because we actually read lips as much as we listen to the words that are being said. So this is where when you cover your mouth, what it's showing you is that this is showing you at quite a low status. Whereas if you're keeping your hand away from your mouth and sort of showing and breathing from negative elements, it's showing that you're creating a higher status. The next thing, the tone of voice. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming to today's town hall meeting. We appreciate you all being here today. So once again, that comes across as an exceptionally considered, high status tone voice. Whereas, gee, wouldn't it be awesome? While it's exciting, it doesn't show that status. It shows more of a lower status. So once again, I'm trying to show the extremes here because once again, understanding people's observed behaviours, these are things that you can do to create a higher status when you go into your relationships and into your stakeholder engagements, because you can try and, it's called matching. If anyone's trying to find a job in the not too distant future, 3 things you need to do. Firstly, look people in the eye, which is one of these. Secondly, use the words that the person who is questioning you has used and replay them back. And last but not least, mimic their body language. So if they're sort of leaning like this and holding their head to the side, you don't do it immediately, but within about 2 or 3 seconds, just sort of bring your hand over to the side. The reason is people love being like them. Now, I actually used this to my advantage once to get a job, and then it became a disadvantage because I couldn't do the job. Now, that was a long time ago in my professional services career. But more importantly was that I did get, I was able to give them what they needed because they were trying to find people who were like them. In other words, you know that as cultural fit. So once again, these are some of the tricks and trades that you can actually be using. Obviously, verbal content, obviously the words that we use, using the concept around status and the language. Now, obviously we're talking with drivers, and we're talking with analytical people, we're talking about expressives and emotions, and amiable people. They all use certain types of verbal cues as well as words to help them get there. Governance, compliance, guidelines, processes, techniques, outcomes, teamwork, involvement, excitement, motivation. All those words are things that we can be using. So one of the things with your status is listen for the words they're using, replay them back. And also the next but not least is actually reactions or the absence to the other people's impulses. If someone's going to jump up and go, I don't agree with that, the last thing you want to be doing is doing exactly the same. The quickest way to bring someone from that high aggressive approach is actually do the complete opposite. Okay, and then you move back and take a lower voice and a more considered voice, and that basically disarms them. Why? People, when they react, they're looking for a fight. They're looking for someone to match them in that situation. And that's what we find in a lot of things when people are pushing back on you. If you start pushing back on them, they're going to push harder against you, and then you're going to push harder against them. So the quickest way to do that is if they're pushing really hard, you just ease off. So once again, these are a couple of different ways to be able to create your own personal status, whether that be in an online. Now, one of the quickest ways to build a status virtually, have your camera on. I'm finding a lot of meetings these days where people are refusing to put their camera on. Look, I won't judge you on what you wear. I judge you on whether you're tuning up, contributing, and I can see that you're actually providing the non-verbal indications that you're actually achieving what you want to achieve. So once again, provide that. Make sure that you've got plenty of lighting, you've actually got it at the right level, etc. But more importantly, it's about taking pride that you are bringing it to the table. Just like if you're in any other type of face-to-face workshop, that you're actually bringing it with great pride as well. So, high status observations. So a person tends to convey their high status, and how should they be doing? They should be doing the following: maintaining their eye contact, keeping up physical and vocal space. They might want to invade other people's space. Touch them, once again, depending on the level of relationship. In some environments, don't touch anyone. Other environments, it's super high fives, give me a high five, that type of thing. So once again, you need to be aware of the type of environment you get into. The next one, stand tall, straight, head up. One of the tricks that everyone will show you is the quickest way to actually look of a high status is lift your chin by about 1.5 inches. Everyone just try that now. All of a sudden, when you lift your chin, your shoulders went back and your back became straighter. So what that's doing is it's actually lifting up your presence. So it's almost like you're being pulled through the roof of the table. And when you actually bring that physical presence of looking tall and straight, people actually pick up in that non-verbal observation. The other thing is, keep yourself physically higher than other people. Now, that's pretty easy for someone who's 6'5". But more importantly, this is where, if you're in workshops, stand up, walk the room. Provide people the opportunity to be able to understand that you're in control of the environment. One of the things I'm finding a lot these days is people come in, they all sit around a table, and then the extrovert takes over regardless of who's running the workshop. So this is where, by standing up, can give you a lot of elements associated with that as well. In other words, another thing to do is keep your head still while you're talking. One of the things that I'm sure each of you have observed while you've been in a virtual environment is some people love to talk and they're constantly boxing their way around the conversation. They're trying to miss it, and you're trying to keep up with them. It's like, just stay still for a minute. In other words, if you're trying to create that high status through observation, try and keep your head still. Obviously, do the occasional non-verbal to make sure you're keeping people engaged. But yeah, you don't want the whole your head wobbling on a stick. The other thing is I'd love for you to get rid of the word out of your vocabulary. Allow me to give you an example. Hi, today I'd really like to come together to gather some requirements. Compared to get rid of all those ums. Hi, today I'm looking forward to bringing everyone together to get some high quality requirements. If you want to sound as if you're in control more with a higher status, get rid of the ums, the ers. But fundamentally, the reason why people use ums and ers is because A, they're buying time to think, B, they haven't prepared what they're about to say, or C, they haven't practiced this concept of replacing ums and ers with silence. So it's a really, really powerful trick, and you'll find that when someone can provide and sound more confident in their presentations with no ums and ers, you're going to listen to them a little higher as a leader and as a higher status. So once again, we want to make sure that you've got the right contrast. You might want to sit on a stool, you might put your hands on your hips, you might do all these different physical elements. And for those of you who have never done any body language, if you want to go and look up a gentleman who is the world's leading expert in body language, a gentleman by the name of Alan Pease, P-E-A-S-E. Alan's been doing body language now for over 50 years. And he teaches people how to actually use their body, and fundamentally everything that I'm sharing with you right here are the foundations to body language and how people perceive you based on their visual cues and representations. So let's talk, we've got the high status. Let's now talk about some low status so that we know what we're looking for when we're trying to either convey a lower status or the fact that we can actually see that others are conveying their lower status. And I'm going to bring them all in at the same time. Why do you think people giggle? There's only one reason why people giggle when you ask them a question, and that is because they don't know the answer. They use that as an emotional signal back to you to actually say, yeah, I think I know. When you start getting down to that level, ask a better question. You've basically hit the bottom of the knowledge bank that that person has on that particular subject. So people use giggling as a way to increase their, to show low status, but it also shows that they're running out of knowledge and ideas. So once again, you'll see that low status is a bit of an opposite to high status. This is where we try and become looking away with our eye contact. We're taking up a smaller space. We're moving our head while we're talking. We're sort of touching our face and our hair because we're a little bit nervous. We're trying to make sure that people can't, that I'm trying to stop them from absorbing everything because I'm getting a filter in front of them so they can't see my lips while I'm talking. And last but not least, quickest way to increase your low status, use lots of ums and ers in your sentences because people then start switching off because they think you don't know what you're talking about. So ultimately, what have I tried to share with you today? What are our last thoughts? Ultimately, what I've tried to do is give you an understanding to remember your current social style. Now, remembering, you can be versatile. You may be going into an environment that's a bunch of drivers. You're going to have to adjust your style, if you're not a driver, to fit with them, to be able to build the rapport and get the information you need quickly. The next thing is you need to adjust your style to connect with the receiver. As we mentioned before, there are breakdowns in the communications, in verbal and non-verbal communications. What I've tried to share with you today is to try and reduce some of those barriers. because ultimately what we're trying to do is make sure that we're trying to connect the style with the person so that they feel comfortable to be able to continue in the engagement that you're having with them. Next is to consider your status. Okay, well, it's great to understand the style, the words, the actions, the approaches, and all the things we've talked about earlier, which once again are all in the slide deck for you to review afterwards. But more importantly, it's also to consider your status. Okay, because remembering, people will judge you not just on the things you say, but the way you hold yourself and the way you will actually do it. So everything tonight, you'll notice that I'm wearing a suit, tie. I've got a professional headset on so that I'm doing it. So I've taken the time and the effort to be able to portray a professional image, because that's the audience that I'm hoping that I can build trust with so they can learn from me. The next is, ultimately, it's about trying to communicate easier. Once we understand how people like to be communicated with and how we can adjust our style to communicate with them, it ultimately makes our engagement with them so much easier. One of the things I constantly have to be mindful of is slowing down. And that's why when I'm around people, I have to be constantly remembering that, okay, I've got to let someone else have an opportunity to talk. I've got to let someone else provide their thoughts. Now, speak to me after 9 red wines. Now, I don't think you've got a chance in hell of putting a word in. But look, at the end of the day, hopefully that's not what you like on a day-to-day basis at work. But more importantly, we're really trying to ultimately do all of this is to make your communication easier. So ultimately, what am I trying to help here is for you to complement your stakeholder skills. These professional skills and these competencies are things that you don't have to go to uni to do. So one of the things I'd really like you to do right now, is to reflect on the things that we've gone through today and just pick one thing that you're going to do differently tomorrow. Let me repeat, what's the one thing that you're going to do differently tomorrow? Step 1. Step 2, what's the one thing that you're taking out of today that you're going to share with 3 of your colleagues? First up, what's the one thing you're going to do differently, and what's the one thing you're going to share with 3 colleagues? The reason is why do I want it to share with 3 other people? I have the pay it forward philosophy. It gives you the ability, if I can share one thing with 3 people, and each of those people share it with 3 more people, and those 3 people share it with 3 more people, ultimately we can be able to make a significant difference in the way we as business analysts increase the profession and the professionalism of our profession to be able to really understand how we add value back, not to ourselves, not just to our teams, not to our projects, not to our organisations, but also our communities. So when I talk about the 3 people, it doesn't have to be someone you work with. Okay, it could be someone in your family, it could be someone in your friend group, it could be in any of the community engagements that you have. So ultimately, that's the challenge I'm placing on you today. Because ultimately, the reason why I do what I do is I help organisations and individuals achieve more. And by really focusing on these professional soft skills and these professional awareness and the ability to make your status and your awareness of your style, that's how people will interpret with you without you even opening your mouth. So this is how you're in control of your own destiny. And this is why one of the things that I'll encourage you to do every morning, jump in front of the mirror, grab your fingers, push it up to the side, and put a smile on your face. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, we do what we do because we love what we do. And that's why Mindavation's been going for 21 years, and we'll continue to do such. While I'm alive, my philosophy in life is to pay it forward. So once again, if I'm able to help in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. What I'd like to do now is there's been lots of chats and questions and comments coming through. I'd like to open up to the forum for any questions, comments or thoughts. And ultimately, if anyone would like to share what their next step is.
So Haydn, it's Gary. I'll just cut in there and say I've passed some questions through to Meg, and Meg was going to share those questions with the group. And see what you've got to say about them.
Fantastic.
So, over to Meg.
Awesome. Well, that was fantastic, Haydn. I know I'm definitely going to be more mindful of slowing down and letting other people get into the conversation a little bit. And I see in the comments that a lot of people are really resonating with smiling throughout the day and doing this to start your day. So I think I'll try that tomorrow and see if it gives any better results. We've had a few questions come through, and there's quite a common theme with quite a few of them. One that definitely resonates with me is that a lot of the things that you've been talking about relates to the visual cues of body language and being able to see somebody in a physical sense. A lot of people are starting to work online, and for a lot of people it's looking indefinite. I know personally I've started a new job in the last 2 months or a new client site, and so getting to know a team entirely virtually has been quite challenging because you have no context apart from a voice on the other side of the phone or a static kind of face on the side of the screen. What's your advice for how to translate these stakeholder skills to a virtual or remote work?
Absolutely. And look, it's a great question that I get asked constantly. And it's not just through the current situation we're in at the moment, but a lot more teams are working virtually with teams scattered around Australia and around the world, depending on where their service providers are. The first thing is to want to understand. That's step one. Firstly, that you want to understand. One of the things that has been a real trick that I have used extensively over the last 5-10 years is actually looking at LinkedIn and seeing people's interests, seeing where they've worked, seeing if they've got mutual connections. I was just recently at a client site to talk about doing a business analysis competency assessment across their entire team. Hadn't met this client before, it was roughly a new client, so the 3 people, guess what I did? I went and had a look at their LinkedIn profile. I've worked out where they work, what their backgrounds are, and would you believe it, out of the 3, that we all had mutual connections. We had all similarly worked on similar type projects. So of course what you do is do your homework. That's really what I'm saying. First up is do your homework. Secondly, when you can't see people, this is where you really need to be able to use your voice. Now at the moment, I'm going to change my voice in 3 different pitches. First up, I'm going to start talking through my nose. Okay, this is sort of putting more air through my nose, and you can start hearing that it's really coming through, and it's a bit hard to understand. The next thing is I'm just going to start using my voice from my mouth and from my throat. This is where I'm putting a little bit more emphasis. It's sounding a little bit more considered. Next up, I want to talk about talking from my diaphragm. This is where I'm talking really from the air is leaving from my diaphragm, and I'm more worried about the words projecting from my chest rather than through my throat and through my mouth. You'll notice there that those 3 different elements, just whether you're talking through your nose, through your mouth, or through your diaphragm, can actually portray something someone who cannot see you. So it's amazing how much we think in pictures. I want to give everyone an example. Can everyone just close their eyes as long as no one's driving? Close your eyes for 1 second. I'm going to use one word, and that word is kettle. Please open your eyes. How many of you actually saw the letters K-E-T-T-L-E across your brain? Probably less than 8% of the population. 92% of the population think in pictures. Okay, so we're thinking about the kettle that we have at home or at work, or for some of us it's kettle chips because it's that time of night. It's just that stage that people think in pictures. So when there is an absence of visuals, people will start creating their own own picture in their head. So the trick of the trade, upload a picture of yourself. If you don't want to be on video, update a picture of yourself so everyone knows what you look like. Okay, so then they all of a sudden go, oh, okay. Now, as we know, the name Sam, is it a male name or a female name? The answer is yes. It can be both. So this is why I have actually, in the past, I'm going, oh yeah, Sam's on the call. I really need to talk to her about this. And then all of a sudden this voice came on, and it was Sam. And it was a male voice, and once again, I didn't see it. So once again, try and create as many visuals as possible. The second thing is start using your tone in regards to the different elements, and more importantly, vary the pace. Get rid of your ums and ers, so that increases the status that was spoken about throughout this. And whether you're doing that physically or online, it's really important that you are sounding like you're in control.
Great. The next, now that you've said get rid of your ums and ers, first word I say, typical. We've got a question from Nevadita, in Sydney Branch around how to elicit responses from stakeholders who are using a lot of words. So you spoke a lot about how to get responses from shy or timid people. But what happens if people are using a lot of words, are very just won't shut up, and they're not actually answering the question?
Oh, Meg, you've never come across someone like that. Look, the quickest way to... there's basically two ways. The first one is I'd say, look, that's fantastic. Would you be able to summarise that down into 20 words so that I can capture that, so that I can share that with the team? So in other words, give them the opportunity to consolidate it themselves. Step one. The second one is ultimately ask them to say, look, that's fantastic. I really appreciate all those words. Would you mind sending that to me in an email so that I've got that captured correctly? Because at the moment there was a lot of information. I don't want to miss out on any of it. So put the onus back onto them. The third one there is to actually sort of say, okay, that's great. How does that align back to achieving one of our functional requirements or one of our scope items or one of our sprints or one of our products? In other words, get them to tie it back so that you've got the context of how to take those words they're saying and try and make sense of how they're trying to align it back to achieving one or many of the outcomes. Yeah, one of the things I always try and do is get them to summarise it. Hey, look, could you just give me, that's great, could you give me that in 20, 25 words so that I can write it down really quickly, and I'm happy to elaborate with you later. And what it does, it makes them try and distill it into words.
Yeah, that's something that I think we could all use a little bit more of. There's a question from Summer who's saying, have you got any tips for how you manage different behavioural styles in the one setting?
Yes, be prepared. Look, this is where the use of body language and the movement. So I want to now talk over here. I now want to use, so in other words, use hand gestures. One hand gesture I ask you not to do is just stick your hand up in front of someone's face. That's probably the worst thing you can do. The best way to do that is the reason that we have people who just don't shut up is they want to hold the floor. So disengage eye contact. Okay? Disengage eye contact. You may want to potentially just move your body language around someone else or say, look, thanks very much for that, Andrew. Now I'd like to open it up to the rest of the group on how we can add the additional requirements to it. So once again, allow them to be heard, but also let them know that they are not the only ones. Look, that's fantastic, Andrew, and what I'd like to do is to be able to elaborate on that further by now opening it up to the team to open it. So this is where I would really emphasize understanding true facilitation skills, not just elicitation skills. Elicitation is just getting information out of people, and yes, it's all varied. Facilitation is truly understanding how to acknowledge the different personas in the room, but more importantly is to then adjust your style. The other trick, specifically you're in a group environment, break them into small groups. With the person next to you, what I'd like you to do is sit down and share